Hello, good morning. Are we okay to start? We're starting a few minutes late. We'll see whether we can make up the time. Good morning, everybody. I'm Yanos Michopoulos. I'm here on behalf of the New Energy Business School, which is a Dutch business school based in Groningen, as the ambassador was talking about. First of all, I would like to thank Petros and the organizers for the opportunity to be here. And I would like to, I'll introduce a panel in a minute and invite them to give an opening talk, short, because then we would like to have questions, not only within the panel, but also with the audience. Now, I was looking at the program, and if we are really serious about covering the program, Mr. Kostas, then this panel needs to last until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I hope everybody's okay, because we are addressing every possible issue related to what's happening, climate, investments, renewable energy. But on a serious note, it's a very well put panel together because we have policy, oil and gas, renewables, and finance. I think we have covered just about every angle of the theme of the symposium. First of all, we have Petros Varelidis, the Secretary General for Natural Environment and Water Resources. We have Vasilis Tsaitas, CFO of Hellenic Energy now. Notice the change. Who has everything. And Vasilis is an old colleague from a small oil company. We work together and is in a good place to tell us about what's happening in that transition. Panagiotis Papastamatiou, who I think is synonymous to wind energy in Greece and at large, not only with his own company, but the industry association. And last but not least, Dusko, help me with the pronunciation. Krsmanovic from UK Export Finance to cover the finance angle, but also Dusko has also a background in policy, lobbying and law and other things. So we have a good panel. I would like to start by inviting the Secretary General to give us the opening talk. And then we will take turns to give a little speech, if we may say so, and then have some conversation in the panel and with the audience. Please.
Okay. First of all, the last 2 months, we have seen a spectacular show of the consequences of climate change. I think this has resulted in some shift to the focus of policies, because up until now, we were mainly discussing about mitigation, climate change mitigation, where obviously renewables is the main tool that we have to to make that happen. Okay, it's energy efficiency as well. Okay, but I believe that energy efficiency has its limits, technical limits, whereas renewables, they have a huge potential to be developed further. However, because of the natural disasters that we had in August and September, the forest fires, the mega forest fire in the Evros region and the 2 floods in Thessaly region and Evia, I think everybody realized that what until now was just a theoretical discussion about climate change adaptation should take a more tangible meaning, because now I think it is better understood from the politicians and the citizens what adaptation is about, what is the issue, and why we need to take measures to deal with it. Because when a problem is slowly developing, you don't pay attention, you get used to it. You start from a marriage of love, and you end up in a marriage of convenience. You haven't understood how did this happen, Where did you lose it in the process?
What happened in between?
Yeah, because it's a slow process. If it's a fast event, then everybody realizes the problem. And I think we're at that point now. Of course, by no means that we should forget mitigation. Mitigation is number one. There's a lot of money invested in mitigation, and it's renewables is maybe in Greece possibly the fastest growing sector of the economy. So we shouldn't take our focus from mitigation and renewables. But at the same time, when we design new infrastructure, for example, we need also to take into account the aspect of adaptation, something that until now was in paper, on paper, it didn't happen in reality. It was just 1 page in the environmental study that adaptation was taken care of. We ran a model, and we are sure that the infrastructure will be resilient for the next 50 years, and that's it. Very, very much in theory. Now, I can tell you from the ministry, we are looking for very tangible ways that we can intervene in order to make our infrastructure more resilient, so able to adapt to the new conditions, because we shouldn't fool the citizens. Well, not 4 years before the elections, anyway. We can afford to be honest with the citizens 4 years before the elections. And there are no magical solutions. I mean, next time that there's going to be a rain of that size, it's going to be a flood of that size. So we need to make sure that next time the irrigation pumps won't, be flooded and stop working. So simple things. Maybe we can raise them. We can have them 2 meters height, and just avoid the problem. So there are many simple solutions. All solutions have some cost, and we need to see how much of that cost the state can afford to subsidize, because the state cannot subsidize everything. But still, in some cases, there is a need for subsidies. We need to look at the issue of water management overall, which is a big issue, because at the same time we have droughts, we have water scarcity. In Thessaly, we have both floods and water scarcity. So we need to see how we improve our water management. And we need to educate people, both for adaptation and mitigation. And I want to end my opening intervention with mitigation, just to say that unfortunately we still see huge resentment for new renewables in Greece. And the media are used to blow up any reactions. And of course, as the politicians, we bite the bait, and then we try to manage sometimes issues that are not really there. So we have to find the right balance. We have to convince local societies, but we have to keep at the back of our mind that sometimes there are no real reactions from local societies, but there are reactions from maybe other entrepreneurs that don't like, this development, but they like their own development. So there's also another type of war behind this publicity, and it's the because the media do not go for, they don't try to inform people, they try to attract the attention of the people. So if we remember that, we should judge the news under this perspective, so that we get a good sense of reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments, if I may, and I will like to plant a question in the mind of all the speakers. First of all, I think we all share the point about the time. The time is yesterday, and I think you confirmed that, and also the previous panel, and I think everywhere we realize the time is now. I like what you cover, both the aspects of mitigation as well as adaptation, because there's different strategies and interesting debate, which planted a question I would like to plant is about the resilience, the adaptability of the mitigation solutions we have. For instance, we're developing wind farms and solar panels, etc. Are these resilient if and when events like Thessaly, etc. happens? That's an interesting question. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Vasilis, over to you to tell us how the oil and gas sector are trying to change the DNA and become something else.
Thank you, Yanos. Kalimera to all, and many thanks to the Association of Energy Economics for having me and giving me the opportunity to participate in this panel. So I think it's important to understand the expectations on the energy transition and the role that each of the subsector will play. Certainly, renewables has a key role, but we need to make sure that we understand considerations around the more traditional, let's say, energy sectors. This is very relevant for us at Hellenic Energy, because we've been traditionally producing molecules, but we're now moving also into electrons. And we see that both will have a significant role to play. You can't do with one of the two only, certainly. And I think it's important to set the scene and basically tackle the objectives that we have to consider in the energy transition journey. And we should never forget that, okay, number one is sustainability. The Secretary General mentioned that in Greece we've recently seen the pressing need to change and get as close as possible, or even succeed on the targets. The second is cost. This has to be done in a way that is affordable for consumers and for industries. We should never forget that. Otherwise, it will be a problem for governments and then again for consumers. And it's a catch-22 that we cannot get away with. And, you know, we were coming from a relatively long period of affordable energy prices that changed recently, and we need to see how we should never forget that we need to deal with that. The third one is security of supply. Again, I will refer to the recent energy crisis. Geopolitics have always been playing a role in the sector. We've been susceptible to shocks with significant negative impacts, and we've seen that recently. So, making sure that we have the right energy at the right cost and making sure that this is guaranteed, we need to tackle for all three, because if we miss on any of the three, then there will be that will mean that we'll certainly run into trouble and have to redesign our policies. So, you know, it was mentioned also in other panels, energy transition is a journey, right? So we know the end game, certainly, but it will take time. It will cost a lot. And that has to be clearly communicated to all, and see, you know, how we deal with the back and forths in order to get there. Our traditional business is oil and gas, right? So there's no doubt, as much as we hate it, is that we're going to need fossil fuels for a few more decades to come. So no matter what kind of projection you take into account, oil and gas will be a significant part of the energy mix, both in terms of percentage as well as in terms of absolute numbers. So, you know, rather than saying, you know, we don't like it, you know, shut down petrol stations and facilities, we need energy for the reasons that we mentioned before in the right mix. So we need to see how this industry plays along the energy transition, and certainly the initial target is to decarbonize processes. And it was also mentioned before, carbon capture is carbon capture and storage initially, and we'll discuss about further ways to go around. Energy efficiency, certainly that this is a cut-across theme on all industries, but even more relevant for energy industry. And after decarbonization and reduction of emissions at the process level, then we have to move on how we decarbonize our products. So then we need to see how we utilize captured CO2, for instance. We combine it with energy carriers like hydrogen, and we change the energy mix at the consumption in a way that has a positive impact and contributes to our targets. And we kind of redesign and redefine the industry. What we would call liquid fuels business as an industry is very well placed to lead the transition. I mean, we've been talking about hydrogen economy, right? So our industry, refining, are the largest producers and consumers of hydrogen worldwide. So around 40% of hydrogen currently produced and consumed is actually done by refiners. So there is a know-how and can set the base for the evolution of hydrogen into blue. We talked about the carbon capture and storage, and green further on. The other is the fact that usually it's the same business, the same groups that have the networks that currently supply liquid fuels and will in the future be able to supply the alternative fuels, whether it's bio as an interim or further on carriers or hydrogen fuel, and electromobility, certainly that it's also part of the solution. So at Hellenic Energy, on those lines, we're in the process of developing several projects. So on the decarbonization, there's a number of energy efficiency projects on all three of our refineries. And we're also starting the development of a carbon capture and storage project at our Lesfina refinery for the conversion of, let's say, currently gray hydrogen into what we would call blue hydrogen, right? And this is a significant project in terms of scale. We're talking about abatement of around 550,000 tons per annum. So this is close to 15 to 20% of our Scope 1 emissions. So it's a big step, and it's important to be able to go ahead and implement this. So it's a number one priority. It's actually the largest contributor to our decarbonization plan. At a smaller scale, we're also planning to even more quickly start the development of a 10 megawatt electrolyzer powered by on-site photovoltaic at our Lesfina refinery. That will to produce green hydrogen. That will initially displace grey hydrogen currently produced at the refinery. Then you have, like in more, let's say, future projects and more ambitious, we're at the pre-feasibility stage of a project that will, with a significant photovoltaic capacity and a direct line that will transfer electricity to our Thessaloniki refinery. It will satisfy the needs of the refinery as a whole. That includes obviously behind the meter storage facilities, and the excess of the production will be power and electrolyzer to produce green hydrogen as a carrier again, either fossil fuels or methanol or ammonia. So all these projects will take us where we want to be. On the green part, because you should never forget that, we've been in the molecule for long and people know us for that as our core business. Over the last few years, we've come a long way to become the largest PV producer, the largest PV operator and producer in Greece. Total 356 megawatt of operating capacity in the country, and that includes a recent market entry in Cyprus, mostly PV, but also wind. Significant pipeline of around 4 gigawatt across technologies. We have a target initially to get to 1 gigawatt of capacity in the next couple of years, and we have the projects following market entry in Cyprus and Romania. So we now will be operating in 3 countries very soon. Romania is in development phase. Greece, obviously, and Cyprus are operating. And so we have certainty in order to achieve the target of 1 gigawatt operating capacity and more than double that by 2030. And that does not include offshore winds. Well, it's a longer term, but when the sector starts the journey in Greece, we're certainly going to be part of it, to have already a partnership with RWE. In the interest of time, I think I'll stop here, open a few items, and can come back on the others. Thank you.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you, Vasilis. Vasilis started by reminding us of this famous trilemma, the triangle, which is not only sustainability for the energy transition, but is also cost and security of supply. And we need to move within that triangle, pushing the boundaries appropriately. And you also reminded us that the whole is a journey, work in progress, as they call it in the UK, from molecules to electrons and other projects. I will wait to hear from everybody, and I'll come back to you because I have some questions, because I know you've done something also on the finance side. Also, you've done something on the corporate governance, which is also an interesting part of our supposed to be on the panel. And prepare for me to ask you a difficult question about the cultural change, the DNA change of the oil and gas industry into something else, which is the renewable part, with hydrogen, different colors, etc. Thank you, Vasilis. Panagiotis, a veteran of the wind energy, and I mean it in a positive way. And these guys have been talking about wind energies in the 90s, when it's like space industry today. Well, that was wind industry in the 90s. Panagiotis, not only what's happening today, but what's your vision, expectations, challenges for the future, 2030, 2050?
Thank you, Yanos. Thank you, the organizers, for the invitations. I'm obliged to say that I don't consider myself a veteran. Okay,
meant it as a compliment.
I'm only 52. And also, I'm not a veteran. There are pioneers and people in our sector much more important than me, who had created this sector, both from the public and the private sector during the 80s.
That's a better word, pioneer, no veteran. I apologize.
I'm not. So, yes, this is a challenging panel. I would like to start with a general comment about the big picture, or how I anticipate the energy transition on a more strategic level. What is the reading, how we read the energy transition. And I will start with 2 figures. If we will achieve a climate neutrality by 2050, that means that in Greece, we will have achieved a reduction of our energy consumption by almost 25%, and at the same time, increase of the electricity consumption 3 times. We are going to triple the electricity consumption in Greece by 2050, while at the same time reducing the whole energy consumption by 25%. This is a revolution. We are not speaking here only for an energy planning process. Energy transition is a strategy who will change our daily life. Obviously, electrification is a very important dimension in this process. electrification of, it is what we were calling some years ago power to X. Electrification of mobility, storage, hydrogen, heat, everything. So only one few examples for our daily life. This achievement means much more clean air in Athens, in our cities, and much lower noise in our cities. Imagine this picture for our cities in 2050 and how this will change the life of our children. However, we are speaking about a revolution here. And if we realize this, the next thought is to say, all the discussions we are doing right now about projects under implementation, reactions against these projects, 2 wind turbines here, some wind parks there in a mountain and some photovoltaics, is only a very, very limited part of this great picture. In 10 years or in 20 years, if we are honest, when we say that we want to achieve climate neutrality by 2050, all these discussions will be only a detail. What we need to do is much, much more. We need renewables, of course, storage, and grids. It is a total different strategy for the design of our electricity system. And of course, all this infrastructure, in order to make a small comment which is related with the topic of our panel, all this infrastructure should be resilient to the climate change. And I have to say that we have some examples now with the Daniel phenomenon in Thessaly. I spent two days, 1 week after the Daniel storm in Thessaly, and I saw photovoltaics in Thessaly area who faced a lot of problems, damages. There are projects who have totally collapsed. So the same applies to grids. That means that when we design a project, of course, we will look for the potential, we will look for the accessibility. Obviously, now we need to look also a proper siting and a proper design in order to accommodate future extreme phenomena like Daniel or Elias. Now I will now have my hat of wind energy, and I will say that I have the belief that wind energy is by default more resilient on climate change or such kind of phenomenon than other kind of renewables.
And this is not a biased opinion; it's an honest opinion.
It is a biased. It is a biased opinion. But I had this picture when I was driving around Thessaly last weekend, 2 weekends before. Now, having said that, the next thinking is the policies that we should apply. And there are, yes, 2 dimensions of these policies: mitigation, this is energy transition, plus adaptation, to build our infrastructure and adapt our ways of life to not to be affected so much by this phenomenon. I will say both are very important. However, I will say that we need to avoid the dilemma here. I can see a tendency, a kind of risk, who there are forces against renewables. There are all these actors who may not believe in climate change or in the role of renewables in tackling climate change. And I have started feeling that there is a trial from these powers to put a fake dilemma. And this fake dilemma says, we cannot mitigate, forget renewables, forget storage, forget the grids. Let's invest only to adaptation. Let's put all our money to adaptation. This is a fake dilemma. Policy is very important on these issues in order to tackle on an equally and balanced way both policies. The third and final comment, Yanos, is the following. the responsibility of the government and the political parties, and in general the responsibility of the state stakeholders to explain and to present these strategic challenges of the energy transition to the people. This is a continuous process. It is not only to inform about cheap energy for renewables, about no environmental impacts from wind parks. It is not only this. The government has a responsibility to explain this big picture of energy transition, to go aggressively and explain that energy transition is an investment for the future. Otherwise, we will continue seeing articles, even in a serious newspaper, speaking about the cost of energy transition, speaking about increasing prices of energy due to energy transition. And this is a responsibility not of the private sector. Of course, the private sector can support, can explain, but the power and the reliability to perform this information and to pass this information and this message to the general public is on the state, on the governments and the political parties. And we need here a policy and market and advertising policy like we did 2 years ago during the pandemic crisis. Every day the state should pass this message in order to avoid the problems that we will face in 1, 2, or even less time period, years, even less time period, of strong reactions, not against single projects, but against the idea of energy transition due to the fault and the misinformations spread around to the general public.
Thank you, Panagiotis. You see how well coordinated this panel is? We started by talking about the dilemma between adaptation and mitigation. We talked about the technology. And when we start talking about details, Panagiotis brings it back into the policy issues, anticipating a question that I'm going to ask to the Secretary General about European policies. But I can assure you we spent about 2-3 hours yesterday rehearsing and coordinating. Now, Vasilis talked about the transition that they're doing, and all these transitions, he also talked about the cost. And last but not least, we have Dusko, who will cover that cheap finance angle. I know you're coming from
free finance.
I know you're coming from a particular perspective, which is
free finance, of course.
Export Credit Agency, which I remember dealing with it some years ago when I was selling wind turbines and dealing with the Danish. It looked like an exotic financial tool, but today it's becoming mainstream. And Dusko will demystify and will help us understand what could it mean for us in this part of the world.
Thank you, Yanos. Thanks so much. And given the agency I'm representing, you can easily call me veteran because UKEF is the world's oldest ECA, over 100 years in operation. Thanks a lot, really, for having me here. Thank you, the organizers, for inviting me. And I think it's really, there's a lot of interesting angles we can share on how ECA finance, when I say ECA finance, I refer to Export Credit Agency finance or trade finance in general, how it's called alternatively, what ECA finance can do to speed up and actually reinforce the climate change and climate change mitigation in the first place. So maybe just a couple of words about trade finance in general. I've been talking yesterday to a lot of people also outside, but a little bit just to introduce people, and then I will come to how this can actually be used within the projects in Greece, in Romania, in the Balkans. So I'm living and working from Belgrade. I'm covering Central and Eastern Europe and Balkans on behalf of UK Expo Finance. And what is UK Expo Finance? It belongs to this trade finance family. And when we talk about trade finance, we talk about unusual finance. We talk about niche finance. So it was always considered to be some sort of alternative finance mechanism. Why alternative? Because in the past, it's been used mostly, especially before the crisis in 2008 and 2009, it was used to finance unusual export deals that normally commercial banks wouldn't be willing to offer support for easily. Aerospace, sales of commercial aircrafts, defense deals, different kinds of, export products that normally couldn't be financed easily through the market offer of commercial banking or regular banking. And after the crisis, trade finance grew a lot in the world. So trade finance organizations such as UKEF, SACE from Italy, OEKB from Austria,
EKF.
ETF, EKV from Denmark. They have started supporting exports from their countries to the countries of origin because actually banks after the crisis were also very risk averse, right? So they didn't want to lend money that easily. The pipeline was very narrow, and they only wanted to go for a very safe business models and very safe lending. And this is where the export finance generally started growing in the world, supporting different kinds of export deals. Nowadays, UKEF is, as I said, one of the oldest, if not the oldest world export credit agency. We have portfolio about 45 billion globally. And a lot of that portfolio is actually going into the renewable energy projects. And I can say that last year we've been rated as the most sustainable ECA in the world. And I think we have, for the past 2 years, have managed not to support even one financing project which was related to carbon energy at all. So now coming back to the renewable energy and how we can actually help it work out and unlock additional funds actually for developers across the region to reinvest even more and to speed up the process. Everybody says that there's a lot of money on the market and there are a lot of investors and there's really a lot of money, so you just have to go and grab it. But in reality, financing is not easy, and it's never been easy. And especially if you talk about the project finance, it's never been easy. And especially if you talk about new technologies like hydrogen, very high tech and battery storages, there's a lot of volatility and a lot of unknowns around these projects, offtake, commercialization, because many of these projects have not been paid off yet in many, many countries. So there are a lot of question marks around. What UKEF can bring to this market? UKEF can bring very flexible finance for companies like yours to develop wind projects, especially offshore wind projects, big PV projects, battery storages, hydrogen-related projects, by just having part of the supply tied to the UK. So we normally say there are two ways to explain it. 20% of UK content within a project will allow you to finance up to 95% of the value of the project, or any purchase from the UK, we can multiply it ×5 and allow you basically to get better terms by the banks to finance your project. So this is, when it comes to the content requirements, very low. And if you're into onshore wind, pretty much every offshore wind park in Europe or in the world will have UK components, even if you know or don't know about it. Almost all offshore wind turbines are manufactured in the UK, so any producer will normally have blades from the UK, underwater cabling, different kinds of technology, and services included. What I was trying to say, yes, so flexibility and the UK content on one side, and then we come to something that I think is very interesting. It's repayment terms spread. So if you go to a bank and look for the project finance, banks normally don't like to lend money on long horizons. Banks like short cycles so they can multiply business cycles as much as possible and earn as much as possible. With UK Export Finance or other ECAs, you can get, for renewable energy projects, repayment terms of up to 22 years, excluded construction time. So door to door, it can be 25 years, 27 years. And imagine now if your return on investment comes in 10 years, 8 years, 12 years, imagine how much cash flow you can relax and release from the project and redirect it somewhere else while repaying this for 22 years. Of course, repaying project in 22 years is not going to be the cheapest loan, but it's going to be a very flexible loan. And there is no commercial banking that will back up this kind of lending without an export credit agency involved. So what we in theory do, we will partner up with the developer, we will partner up with the developer bank, or find bank together on international market or a Greek market. We will pledge 100% unconditional UK sovereign guarantee on this loan on behalf of the client. We will be basically credit enhancer, AA rating. Banks will, based on our AA rating, decrease the margin, right? The cost of the financing will go down. Flexibility will go up. We will charge certain premium on top of that, but all-in cost associated with the transaction will be still very competitive to market alternatives, if not in many markets, the only ways you can finance the projects like this. So to just maybe give 2 minutes overview what is going on in the Balkans. So I'm covering a lot of regions, as I told you, a lot of countries, yes. I'm talking to multiple onshore wind developers in former Yugoslavian countries. I'm talking about financing one, probably is going to be one of the largest PV parks in the Balkans. We're talking about 1 giga battery, 1 giga solar and 300 giga battery park. There's a lot of talk about big hydro and pump storages in the Balkans. So UKEF will most likely have part in all of these deals. So I'm inviting everybody here after the panel, or just reach out to me through the British Embassy if you have financing requirement in renewable energy or any other capex related activity that involves, or you're willing to involve British suppliers. I'm happy to have a talk to you, especially with my colleagues in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dusko. That was very interesting. You've done a very great sales job to promote the benefits of export credit finance. But on a serious note, we have been discussing how challenging some of these transition games are, and certainly not so big enough to require collaboration. And here we're talking even in the space of the finance, because the numbers are big, the projects are huge. So collaboration is the name of the game, and you alluded, and thank you, Dusko. I would like to come back to the panel and ask one question and give them a minute and a half or two, because I would like to leave some time for the floor. Secretary General, I know your title says Greece. I'm going to ask a European question, if I may, because we're talking about policy, and I would like, what is your view on the European legislation, the European policy? You think they cover adequately all the issues that we're talking about now, sort of mitigation, adaptation, and you can be as open and careful as you want to be? I know it's digitally consumed, but digitally transmitted, but we'd be grateful for your wider perspective.
Yeah, first of all, Greece is part of the EU, so we need to be active also at the European level, since the environmental legislation comes mostly from the EU. So at the beginning of times, adaptation and mitigation were at an equal foot. Later on, because mainly of the ETS, and then also the regulations for CO2 emissions from various types of vehicles, and then the HELLENiQ regulation for the renewables in the fuels. The mitigation part became very concrete, and got a lot of money behind it, because there were investments involved. Also, CCS is a new area of investments. So lots of money and focus goes to mitigation and adaptation. So far, has remained at the level of EU adaptation strategy. So very soft policy. We think that this should change. We think that the EU has added value to offer to the national adaptation policies, and I'll give you a very simple example that you understand, because we had that incident with the floods. We have this directive for the flood directive, that requires the flood hazard maps. These maps, by law, but by the directive, they have to be with a return period of 50 years and with a return period of 100 years, and a longer one. We said nationally 1,000 years, schematically. The problem with that is that in reality, the level of certainty to show that this is a return period of 100 years or 50 years is very low. And we see that where we had in Thessaly,
The floods.
we had, in 3 years, because we had the Yanos 3 years ago, in 3 years we had 3 incidents that, in Larissa, Karditsa, Trikala, it was of the size of the repeat period of 200, 300 years. In Volos, it was, 1,000 years. So this cannot be a coincidence. And the problem is that when you have a map that you give to the Ministry of Infrastructure or the Ministry of Civil Response, and you talk about something that can happen once every 100 years or once every 1,000 years, who cares? I mean, it's not going to be taken seriously you have good chance that it's not going to fall under your your term.
Probabilities are on your side.
Yeah. So you don't bother. So we need to change that. So we intend at the next ministerial council, the minister Skylakakis intends to ask the Commission to review the flood directive in order to become closer to a real operational tool, and in order to also better pass the message to the citizens that we're not talking about an event that is going to happen once every 100 years, because that's we cannot say that. We talk about, for example, X amount of water. So if you have X amount of water, you have that flood. So then it becomes more real and can be communicated better also to the citizen, and we don't need to apologize why there was a cataclysmic rain.
So you're optimistic that things will happen?
Yes, of course.
And we can quote that because that's part of the challenges we have in our times, is that politicians, and I don't mean you, of course, politicians everywhere, that they don't fully appreciate the long timelines that needed in the energy and infrastructure space. And you're talking about hundreds and something years. Politicians' horizons is, what can I do this weekend? What can I do next month, etc. Anyway, Vasilis, thank you. Vasilis, I would like to ask one question. I know you're doing a lot of projects and you're making a lot of changes and developments. Did you get some hope and some encouragement from what you heard from Dusko on the finance side? And I know you've done recently a small little deal, which you might give us one or two words on that.
Thank you, Yanos. Certainly worth discussing about it and taking the bat from Dusko on what's the optimal way, let's say, to finance renewables. There's no right answer, obviously, but let's try to see what we've done and how close we got to that. So last July, we announced a framework agreement with two leading Greek banks for the financing of project financing of renewables in Greece on a fully non-recourse basis. The agreement is for committed available funds of up to 566 million, with an additional 200 million tranche that can be an add-on on those. The agreement provides so the agreement is available at the level of Hellenic Renewables, which is our parent company for all renewable developments, and effectively Hellenic Renewables can designate and select the projects that can draw from those funds for their to arrange into individual project finance structures. So it's important to highlight also that there are clear eligibility criteria. So and when you look at the project either for development or for acquisition, immediately you know whether it's bankable or not. The agreement provides for wind, onshore wind and PV in Greece, for all revenue models, including PPAs with the system with the PEP, either FIT or FIP. It provides for commercial PPAs with third parties and also allows for some merchant part. So it's really something that will support us in the next few years and give us certainty for developing all models. Terms are very competitive at both Greek and international level, so they can get us to the best possible leverage of returns for our equity. It's an agreement which is a first for Greece. It's the first time that such a framework agreement has been announced in Greece, and certainly one of the largest long-term financial structure in Europe. In terms of structure, it's flexible but very fit for purpose. You have tenors of up to 20 years. So very, very long term. and will certainly support our growth. It's sufficient capacity to get us to the gigawatt for the next 2 years. So we have the projects, we have the financing, so it's a matter of time of achieving our target.
Watch this space. This is a big promise. Remind me of my time in DESFA. We signed a big number to finance some big projects that DESFA is doing, but you exceeded. Your numbers are bigger, not by a lot, but bigger. Thank you, Vasilis. That brings me to Panagiotis to say, okay, we move, as you hear, big companies are moving with the help of various fancy finance tools into a mix of technologies towards paradise, which is the energy transition, etc. And I know you have a biased opinion because you come from wind, but in a minute and a half, because I like to leave 5 minutes for the audience, you think we have the right balance? And I'm thinking about the 2030 national action plans, etc. Do we have the right balance between the various technologies? Should we be a bit more biased or focused? You have 1.5 minutes to do your sales speech.
Okay, disclaimer. I have also invested in some photovoltaics, so I don't have a biased opinion. I have the correct opinion. Now, yes, speaking for 2030, our, let's say, anticipation, our criticism that we have made to the plans for the energy planning announced by the ministry is that we are feeling that we need a more balanced mixture of technologies between wind and photovoltaics and small hydro in relation with what have been included in the scenarios presented up to now. Why? Because wind energy is producing every hour of the 24 hours of a day. So this reduce the balancing cost, reduce the requirements for additional investments in infrastructure like storage, and we feel that this maximize the value of renewables for the consumer. Plus, it is an asset, it is a strategic advantage for our country because in our neighborhood, speaking about Italy, Balkans, Turkey, and Greece, the two areas who have very rich wind potential is Greece and the western coast of Turkey. These areas, Greece has much more wind potential than other neighboring countries. So we're expecting that especially Balkans and Italy will mainly achieve their targets through photovoltaics. That creates more value to the electricity produced during the hours where we don't have sun. That means wind energy from Greece and from Aegean Sea. While when we were producing energy with our photovoltaics during noon, most probably all our area will produce electricity, the grids will saturate it, or the prices will be zero or near zero. So from these two perspectives, value during the all day plus a geopolitical strategic advantage for our country, we feel that we need a much more balanced energy mix for 2030.
Thank you. Very clear point. Thank you. Last but not least, Dusko, and I take your offer to be available for coffee to discuss details, but I'm eager to ask you one question about your requirements, and this is a dreaded 3-letter requirement called ESG. Do you incorporate this into your financing considerations, or is it something that...
Thanks for the question. And absolutely, we are trying to be, as I told you, the leading world leading sustainable ECA. So ECG requirements for us are extremely important. We are really trying to be hard on those because we would like to be, to see economy transforming, and this is the government priority. So for us, it's priority as well. I think we are just having a standard ECG requirements for like any other European bank. So we are talking about Equator principles, IFC performance standards in capital infrastructure. So nothing beyond that, but also nothing below that. So I think we are very competitive with other lenders, and we can easily find the common language. So in that regard.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Super. Thank you for leaving about 4 minutes for any questions from the audience. I know we're competing with your coffee break and other things, but there's the opportunity. Policy. What's that?
I have a question.
You have a question? I'm not sure if that's allowed. This is... Go on, Panagiotis. Ask a question.
I have a question for Dusko. I would like to specify a little bit what you told about the process of project finance and what you provide in terms of project finance for floating offshore wind. So my first question is, from your experience, honestly, I don't know, is there any already closed project finance from commercial bus for floating wind for the whole project? I know for some parts of the project, for example, there was, I think, a small part of project finance for a project for a part of the wind float in Atlantic, but I'm not sure. So this is a question for your experience. And then the question for your entity, for your agency, how do you see that? Can you combine your offers for financing for floating offshore now or in some years?
To be honest, I'm not an engineer, so floating for me it's just an offshore wind. So I don't know. To be honest, the answer on that question. I know we've been financing a lot of offshore wind farms, and we are actually a pipeline in that is very strong. Some of the largest offshore wind farms in Taiwan, or Formosa 1 and 2, are financed by UKEF. So I don't know, but what I know and what I can say in principle is that our project finance team and risk analysis team is really trying to be very, very flexible. Obviously, we don't want to be overexposed to risk, and we've been proven to be not overexposed and manage risk very well. But we are really happy to look into new technologies. I told you, something that other banks or other ECAs haven't supported so far. So I think as long as everything fits in the economic sense, it could be supported.
But that's your homework, Dusko, to go back and check and give an answer to Pan. There's no such a thing as a free trip to Athens with hospitality, etc. You need to do some work. Okay, any last question from the audience or from the panel for that matter? My apologies. Yes, Spiro?
Okay, thank you for the discussion. It was very enlightening. So just one comment maybe for the executive secretaries. I don't know if in Greece we are proactive or we are acting after the climate change events. That's something that we should really consider, and we need to be proactive now. We know climate change is coming. We know that these events we are talking about every 1,000 years. I think we'll be talking about this every year. We had a huge flooding event also in Crete last. It was very soon. So it's like if you start adding these up, it's a lot in 1 year. And unfortunately, I think this will be like every year we'll be talking about. This will be becoming like United States, that we have hurricanes every year. It's the new reality in the Mediterranean, especially. One thing in one, other is something maybe.
Spiro, just one at a time. To ask the Secretary General. First of all, you need to tell us how you translate proactive into Greek. And I'm not being funny.
Proactive.
Proactive. I don't think that we understand in our culture what's the word proactive.
We need to think before act, and doing that. We need to act before pre-event. You know that. You know what proactive is.
I think it was a comment. It's a bad comment. No, the answer is that you're right. What used to be considered as something very unusual, it seems that it happens every year or many times per year. So clearly we need to change the way we do things. Actually, that's exactly what we're doing right now in the ministry as regards floods. I spend most of my time in the ministry trying to figure out together with the minister how we will reorganize the proactive part of doing business, because of course the emergency response is also a big issue, and but it's another ministry's competence. But yes, there are going to be huge changes in the way we do things, because we cannot afford to have such damages caused by the natural incidents every year.
Thank you. And I would like to stop here, Spiro, if that's okay. I'm looking at the time, and I know we are running a little bit behind and we have coffee. And I would like to really stay on that positive note, on a serious note, that if we are, collectively speaking, and particularly in our country, a bit more proactive, we can, that journey that Vasilis mentioned, we can accelerate it a little bit. So I would like to thank all the panel members and yourselves for the attention. Thank you.